Although this year's exam season has largely passed without incident or drama, many exams and assessments throughout our education system are potentially facing their greatest ever threat in the form of ChatGPT and other artificial intelligence or AI tools. When freely available websites and apps can write entire essays, projects, articles, poems and stories, as well as produce art and music, among other things, it presents a daunting challenge to the teachers, lecturers and institutions trying to award fair and trustworthy grades. So what impact are ChatGPT and similar AI platforms having in schools, colleges, universities and elsewhere? Do we know how much cheating is already linked to these AI tools? And is anyone or anything ready and able to combat AI-powered cheating in future? Our guests today are Dr Thomas Lancaster, a computer scientist at Imperial College London who has conducted research on academic integrity, cheating and plagiarism, and Jessica Hill, Senior Investigations and Features Reporter for Schools Week and FE Week. I'm Tom Richmond, the Director of the EDSK think tank, and to get a sense of how cheating with AI is changing the way we think about and use assessments, let's go inside your ed.
Welcome to Inside Your Ed, the podcast from the Education and Skills think tank EDSK that looks inside the latest stories from across the education system in England, including schools, colleges, universities and apprenticeships. You can find out more about EDSK's research at edsk.org or on Twitter at EDSK Think Tank.
Thomas, we are going to be talking a lot in this episode about ChatGPT and other similar AI tools, but cheating in exams and assessment is hardly a new problem. So if we were having this conversation before November 2022 when ChatGPT was launched, what would you be pointing to as the most prevalent and potentially the most concerning forms of cheating that were already happening up to that point?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, it's very well observed that cheating has been around for as long as we've had education and any form of testing, where there's been an incentive for people to get more marks than they deserve or to pass something they might otherwise have failed. So we've always been talking about our concerns about cheating in education and in assessments. From my personal point of view, the single biggest thing I've worked on in my career has been contract cheating, a student getting somebody else to do their work for them. So rather than writing their own essay, they go out and they pay a writer, often in Kenya or another country, to do that writing for them. That has long since been an issue. That was an issue before the release of ChatGPT. That is still an issue. Of course, cheating is not purely done by the basis of assessed written work. There are exams as well. I've done a lot of work even prior to the launch of ChatGPT about exam cheating through hidden technology. So, for example, hidden earpieces, so somebody outside an exam room can communicate with someone inside an exam room. These earpieces are so small that they're almost impossible for an invigilator to see inside the ear, particularly if someone, for example, has long hair, which would make them very easy to conceal as well. Plagiarism is another long-standing problem in education. Text that is handed in that is very close to a source document rather than being the student's own work. There's a bit of a difference between plagiarism and some other types of cheating in that plagiarism could be done accidentally if somebody doesn't know how to reference or doesn't know how to write in their own words, and that's why there's a lot of importance about teaching students how to write. But realistically, I could come up with a long list of methods of cheating. If we wanted to go there, we could look at students who are hacking into mark systems and result systems to change the mark and to get a mark other than the one they deserved. And so technology has always been quite a bugbear in how we approach stopping cheating and promoting academic integrity.
Okay, so cheating is definitely not a new phenomenon, and yet the last couple of years have seen an explosion in media coverage around the potential for cheating since ChatGPT was released. But even then, ChatGPT is not the whole story here either. Jessica, in your investigations into AI cheating, what was some of these newer forms of cheating that are causing such difficulties for people working in and indeed running educational institutions?
I mean, I think if we look at schools in particular, young people from the age realistically of about 12 upwards have discovered cheating through Snapchat, my AI it's called. And the way that works is I think Snapchat automatically sent an update just over a year ago, I think it was, to all of its users, giving them this avatar and telling them they could give it human-like features and it would talk to them like to be their friend, essentially. And it was quickly discovered that you could use it to do your homework for you. So I think in schools there's a lot of kids that have used Snapchat to research for their homework. And then you've got this blurred line, you know, what's research and what's just essentially doing the homework for them. And I think it's a shame because it takes away some of the curiosity for learning, because it just becomes about, well, you know, we'll just get this tool to do it for us. And then that takes away some of the motivation and the sort of curious spark that they might get when they have to do a bit of the digging for themselves. So I think that's the bigger problem of it, is just the longer term impact that it has on their motivation. So I think if you ask most young people, and they were completely honest about whether they use AI for cheating, they wouldn't necessarily be using ChatGPT. I think that's more in colleges and universities, but in schools it would be Snapchat. And TikTok is just awash with small tech companies that are bragging, you know, about young people using them to evade AI detection tools to mark assignments. That's for slightly older young people, so in colleges and universities. But there's definitely a lot of small tech companies that are basically, you know, they're called AI detection tools. So they're on the surface, they might appear to be being used by educators to find cheating, but actually in reality, a lot of them are actually marketing their products to the young people themselves to cheat with. So it's a very complex, very morally dubious industry, I would say, because it's shameless how these companies operate, some of them.
Yes, quite. So we've got a situation where we weren't exactly grappling with zero problems around cheating before ChatGPT came along. We've now got apps on your phone, Snapchat, TikTok, and I'm sure several others that can do your homework for you, and they can complete your latest assignment with just a few taps on a smartphone screen. I mean, that all sounds pretty grim from the perspective of fairness and integrity in our various exam systems from school right up to university. But exactly how bad is it? Jessica, do we know how many children and young people are using these AI tools to cheat on tests and assignments?
No. Within the school system, I think schools don't know. And this is the big problem. I think it's quite concerning that it's something that schools are trying to talk to young people about, but often you find that the teachers that are leading the classes where they have a discussion about AI don't know as much about how these tools operate as the young people themselves. So sometimes it's very difficult for the teachers, and it can just be an opportunity for young people to then maybe converse and teach each other about how to use them in ways they shouldn't be using them, rather than, you know what I mean? But you have to talk about these things. It's very difficult for schools because we've opened a Pandora's box, and when you open these discussions, you're also then educating them about the tools and by default sometimes publicising those tools. So it's really hard for schools. There needs to be a lot more regulation about how these tools are marketed to young people. I would say within colleges, I know that in terms of how they're reacting to cheating that they know is happening, I think there was a survey that was done last year that showed that around a third of colleges have issued some sort of guidance, and a third are thinking about it, and a third haven't considered it. So that's within FE colleges. But in terms of how many students are actually using it, I mean, who knows? Because you could ask them in a survey, but they wouldn't be honest about it, a lot of them. So I think it's certainly a lot more than wider society might think it is.
Very interesting. Thomas, you work in the university sector, which has always taken a broader approach to assessment relative to schools and colleges because of the sheer variety of courses and programs that are available. What can we say about the extent of AI-driven cheating among university students? I mean, I've read plenty of media reports of students openly admitting that they use tools like ChatGPT, and some students boasting that they get the best marks they've ever got by using these sorts of tools. But are we stuck with anecdotes, or do we have any hard evidence here?
We have very little in the way of hard evidence. It's the same problem as with most types of cheating, that the only numbers we get are the numbers of students who have been detected. But if you cheat well, presumably you don't get detected, because otherwise you're getting a very bad return on your choice of life decision. So it's hard to give a number. There have been surveys, but I always treat survey results with a little bit of caution, because people do often have an incentive to not tell the truth. And there's also a bit of self-selection bias in a lot of surveys about who is going to choose to respond. The other main problem I have with surveys as well is that students find it quite difficult to differentiate between using ChatGPT or GenAI for learning and using it for cheating, because these can be quite close together. And there's not much of a step between using ChatGPT to get ideas for what to put in your assignment, or asking it to look at a draft and suggest areas where you might improve the argument, to getting ChatGPT to do the writing or to start to go and find the sources for you for that. And we need to really be having a discussion with students about where that line lies, beyond which is cheating, before which is quite acceptable. But all we can go on the fact is that most students have used these tools, but not necessarily to cheat, or at least they may not think of it as cheating, even if there's a different view amongst the educators.
Okay, so it sounds like neither of you have much confidence in the ability of surveys to give us a really strong grip of the extent of AI cheating. Even so, I can't help but feel that the potential for cheating has risen dramatically in recent years, thanks to ChatGPT and the like. So if the technology already exists for students to get these AI tools to produce essays and projects and other assignments, either in part or in full, surely we have to question whether there is still a place for unsupervised work within high-stakes qualifications and assessments, at least. I wrote a report last year called Examining Exams, which concluded that in a world of ChatGPT, the only forms of high-stakes assessment that can deliver reliable and consistent grades are supervised exams, either written or digital, and also oral exams. Thomas, the university sector makes extensive use of unsupervised assignments, such as essays and dissertations being completed at home. So what future do these forms of assessment have, if any, in your view? Is it even appropriate for students to continue being set unsupervised work when the lecturer or marker now has no idea whether or not large numbers of students actually did produce the work themselves?
It's a very tricky balancing act for universities about what type of assessment to use across a course and how to vary this, because at one point you have to try and get the student interested and engaged, and that means working on larger, more open-ended problems, the kind of thing that might look good in their portfolio or might inspire them for the future. Now, I would hope that students feel less inclined to cheat in that type of assignment, particularly if they can see the benefits for employment. But of course, it's always impossible to avoid cheating entirely. Every type of assignment is cheatable if you're willing to spend enough money or to try hard enough. But often the cost of cheating far outweighs any benefits you might get from it. Even before ChatGPT came onto the landscape and people were talking about Gen AI, I was warning against the use of unsupervised assessments in my work on contract cheating. So someone other than the student doing the work. It could be a paid writer the student has never met. It could be their brother or sister or their parents, or people who really want their family member to succeed. So there doesn't necessarily have to be money involved here. And so there's always been a danger about any work completed outside of the university environment. I don't think you can go exclusively to exams. I think exams are very good for testing factual knowledge, for testing work that can be completed over a short amount of time. At the same time, there are some people who will be excellent employees in different disciplines, different businesses, but they may not be great at doing exams because that's not how their brain works. That's not how they were trained, but we still want to be able to accredit their ability for work in the future. So all I can really recommend to universities are balanced type of assessments, there has to be some supervised in-person assessment on every degree, but it may not be necessary for every assignment to be supervised. There can also be checkpoints put in place for high-stakes assignment like projects, dissertations, where students do present, they do take vivas and answer questions. So that is backing up the work they did in their own time, with showing that they also have the knowledge that they should have gained for working on this for what can be 2 semesters in many universities. And finally, we have to be just looking at where AI can be legitimately integrated within degrees, because those are the skills that students are going to need in the future.
Jessica, after all your conversations with practitioners and researchers and academics, what's your take on whether we can trust the work that students are producing at home without supervision?
I don't think we can trust the work that students are producing at home without supervision, unfortunately. But then I think it then means that relationships between educators and students become so much more important. And it's sad that at the moment there's such a crisis in schools, particularly reliant on supply teachers who might not have those close relationships with young people. But I think in the ideal world, we would have a system where there's more of an emphasis put on relationships and the teacher really getting to know those young people throughout their time in education, so that they they understand which are the students that might be cheating when they're given an assignment and which aren't, because they spend so much time with them in class. They know what their faults and their talents are. And then I think we also need to put a real emphasis on the importance of intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic motivation. So what I mean by that is, at the moment we live in a world, particularly with social media, where a lot of young people are very focused on their external image and getting praise for things that they do from others, and obsessed with posting stuff on social media so they can get that kind of feedback back. But I think if we teach young people from a young age and then keep drilling it into them, how important it is for them to have that pride within themselves for having actually learned something and something difficult and challenging, but sort of feeling pride and then getting that pleasure feedback from themselves for something they're proud of having achieved. I think the more we can do that, the less of an issue that the technology presents, because yes, we can't beat it. This is an arms race that we're facing against these tech companies that I think we're always going to lose, because the technology is just getting better and better. And even if you look at, for example, people might say, well, you could give students more oral presentations and interviews. So you could interview them about something they've gone home and researched to check that they've understood it correctly, which I think is good and should be encouraged. But I think where it's a high stakes oral assessment, we have to be really careful about the use of earpieces, which, Thomas, I know you mentioned earlier about earpieces. For example, there's a company I found on the internet who are marketing AI that basically you put an earpiece in when you're doing a job interview. So it was being marketed to use for job interviews, but you could see how people could use it for oral assignments. And it listens to the questions that you are being given, and then it will tell you through the earpiece what your suggested answer should be. I mean, it's probably, I don't know how reliable this technology is at the moment. It might not be that useful for your average student, but 5 years from now, it probably will be. So I think teachers are going to have to be really fleet of foot to catch up with this technology.
Absolutely. So it sounds as though we've clearly got a lot to consider as an education community when it comes to which forms of assessment are practical and appropriate when tools like ChatGPT are freely available. And I dare say the picture is still evolving within institutions, let alone at a national level. On the flip side, if this new technology is causing havoc with assessment systems in schools, colleges and universities, is there any reason to be optimistic that technology could also be the solution? Jessica, you've already mentioned this arms race that education institutions are facing. Have you come across anyone or indeed anything that is proving successful either as a prevention or cure when it comes to grappling with AI cheating?
No. But I do think that it's something that educators are becoming much more aware of and starting to get together and really think about what to do about this. I think government really needs to catch up and really tighten regulations on this ASAP and make it a priority, which I don't think they're doing right now. I think that, as I said, I think it's just that the solution lies in more education of encouraging young people to be more intrinsically motivated. I think that's all you can do, really. And sort of shift the values of in schools of what we value, instead of making it such high stakes and such high pressure for young people that they feel like their exam result is the be all and end all. That it should be more about learning for the love of learning and returning to that. And I think that will then create more young people who, yes, they might. The problem is that if you're a young person who's not overly relying on AI tools and is doing the research, having that joy of learning, doing it for themselves, and you're surrounded by other young people who are getting better marks than you by cheating, I think it can be really demoralising. So the more that we can talk to young people and make sure that they do value the work that they're doing, not cheating, and that they feel proud of themselves for not doing that, the better, I think.
Thomas, do you think it's wise to assume that AI technology could dig us out of the assessment hole that AI technology has pushed us into? Do you think tech companies are able and willing to produce tools that can limit or even stop AI cheating after these same companies have caused part of this problem at the very least?
It's a very difficult question to say how far AI companies should go to stop cheating, because from the AI company's point of view, they're just aiming to produce technology that writes like a human or produces images like a human or whatever type of generative AI they might be working with. So it is relatively easy for them to add a certain amount of watermarking to their text. So watermarking in this case, you might think of a watermark on an image as being a visible symbol that will say this has been created by a machine. But watermarking for images in this case might mean just making a slight change to the color of some of the pixels so they form an almost invisible pattern that can be picked up by a machine. Something similar can happen for text as well, where let's say that your generative AI is producing a series of words, and there's a certain randomization to this process. I won't go into any technical details here. But every 10th word, rather than putting a random word, it positions a known word there instead. And so a system can then look back and reverse engineer it and look for these known words, then as an indicator that this piece of text was written by a particular generative AI. Now, the problem is the companies will not tell us what algorithm was used to produce those watermarks. They will only sell us a subscription service so we can then check, do these watermarks exist? And when you think there are many companies competing in this space, they might or might not be adding watermarks already. OpenAI has suggested that it has been watermarking text now for the past couple of years. But there are a lot of subscriptions needed by universities or by detection services to try and find these hidden watermarks. Now, on top of this, there are all kinds of other ways to detect AI-generated text. The AI generators tend to produce some certain known patterns in the text. There are certain words they might use more than a human, for instance, that we can try and detect using a machine. And the indications are the software in this space gets quite a high accuracy level. But the problem I have, even if it gets 99% accuracy level here at detecting that something is written by an AI, that means you'll be falsely accusing one student out of 100 of cheating, and that can be quite morally difficult, and it can put students through a lot of unnecessary stress. So ultimately, I don't think detection, even though computer scientists are working on this, I don't think that is going to be the solution here. There are always going to be new and improved Gen AI systems coming along as well, and ultimately we have to look much more at working with this technology rather than trying to combat it.
Well, just to probe that a little further, you started off this episode by talking about some of the previous problems we had with cheating around things like contract cheating. And of course, there are bits of software out there. Turnitin is one of the more high-profile ones, which were already trying to stop some of this cheating in the past. Can we put any faith in those sorts of companies to step into the breach, even if the companies developing the AI tools are not necessarily that keen to get involved?
I most certainly think that these companies are going to be doing their best to get a working solution. because that is their business model after all, to be selling solutions to universities designed to prevent and detect cheating. So without naming any particular companies, there are certainly solutions out there that, for instance, look at the writing style of a student from assignment to assignment. And so if between assignment 1 and assignment 2, the writing style changes completely, the sentences are much better written, the language is much more sophisticated, there are fewer mistakes, there are different sentence lengths, indicators like that, then that should be some reason why people might want to just check this work in a bit more detail. But it is always easier said than done, because at the same time, a student might say, well, my writing style has improved because I've been working harder, I've been doing more learning to try and improve my writing, which is what we'd want to see during a university degree anyway.
I just wanted to point out, because you mentioned Turnitin, and just an example to illustrate the problems that we're facing. On the website of Stealth GPT, which is one of the companies that's an AI diagnostic tool, the website advertises how it not only eludes the discerning eyes of Turnitin, but also enhances the writer's voice, ensuring that the work reflects their unique style and intellect. So that's how they're marketing themselves.
Wow, that's quite a marketing slogan. Okay, we are approaching the end of this episode, so it's time for my final question for today. AI-fueled cheating, to me, looks like a very serious threat to the fairness and integrity of many kinds of tests, homework tasks, and other work completed independently by students. And it sounds as though a lot of institutions are really struggling to know how to respond. Teachers, lecturers, exam boards, universities, and I'm sure many others are having to make very difficult judgment calls, from what I can see, about what to do next, which is in itself creating a lot of uncertainty rather than necessarily getting us closer to a solution. So my question is, bearing in mind everything that you've read and heard so far about the challenges that AI cheating is posing, how different do you think our assessment systems will look in 5 years from now as a result of the emergence of tools such as ChatGPT? Jessica, what does your policy crystal ball tell you about the future of assessment after your own investigation into this topic?
Thanks, Tom. So I did 2 different investigations and spent many months looking at this, one for FE Week in the situation in colleges and one in schools. And I spent many hours looking through social media, and it was really interesting because America is ahead of the curve in terms of the tech companies have been flogging AI tools to young people for slightly longer than they have here. So it's interesting when you look at the impact it's having over there, you can see how they're further down the line. So we're going to get the same problems, and we are getting the same problems, but only just starting over here. And there's definitely a sense over there of standards having worsened within the school and further and higher education system, that because there's so many young people who are overusing AI to get answers to things, that it just means the general standard of their writing isn't as good when they are forced to do it without the help of AI. They're struggling more and more. I mean, that was certainly the sense I got from many teachers that were talking about this issue out there. So I think that's quite worrying. So I think we really, really need to think about doing things differently in this country so we don't end up having those standards slipping further in this country too. And I think in terms of what the landscape will look like, I think we are going to have to be less reliant on coursework, which is already happening. I think it's interesting because AI can be useful for those young people who were really disillusioned with the school system. Maybe they were excluded when they were at school, and maybe they served time in prison, and then they associated learning with something very negative. I think sometimes using platforms like ChatGPT to form questions in a way that it makes sense to them, maybe because they've got special educational needs that weren't picked up when they were at school. I think for some young people, AI platforms can be really helpful. So it's not all doom and gloom. So we shouldn't be too depressed about it. But we just have to be very careful and regulate a lot more the way that these companies are, certainly the way they're marketing themselves, the way they're using data from young people, which is the next crisis on the horizon, I think. And there will be legal battles that will unfold, I'm sure, about how young people's data is being used by these companies. So I think it's something that people are going to be talking about a lot more in the future.
I'd certainly echo that. Thank you, Jessica. Thomas, what is your prediction for how the world of assessment will change in the next 5 years thanks to ChatGPT?
Well, AI is part of our lives. It's part of our students' lives. It's part of the lives of everyone working in the UK and beyond. So I don't think this is something that is going to go away. I don't think having an arms race against technology companies is going to be that helpful in the long run. I completely agree with Jessica that there is going to be more regulation needed in this industry for all kinds of reasons as well to go along with that. But beyond that, I do see more varied assessment types. I see AI being integrated into assessments a lot more. We can't avoid that if you've got a tool like Microsoft Word that will start rewriting for you when you're using it. Then we just have to accept that this is a standard piece of technology. And for many years of my life, if I wanted an answer, I had to go and find a book and go and look something up. Then there came along Google and the internet, and I could look up information on a computer system and then eventually on my mobile phone. So now being able to generate information on a mobile phone or on a computer system, unique to me, is just the next natural advancement of this type of technology. And in 5 years' time, we might be interfacing with AI in a different way again. We may see more people who start to have chips embedded within their body, which to me is quite a scary thought. But I know there will be people out there who will want to be at the front of the queue to have their bodies augmented with technology. So we just have to be thinking about preparing our students for the future, for working in a world where the technology has not all been invented yet, for making sure that everyone stays fulfilled in their studies and their life beyond that point, and just getting the interest going. We may have to have in-person exams along the way, but who knows, maybe our virtual reality will be so good that can be considered in person. It is an ever-changing and exciting world.
It is certainly ever-changing. Thank you, Thomas. And that brings us to the end of this episode. My thanks to Thomas and Jessica for sharing their perspectives on this incredibly interesting and important issue. If you enjoyed this episode, then please do share it with others and leave us a good rating wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to hit subscribe to make sure you join us when we next go inside your ed. Bye-bye for now.